The conference room went quiet the second Mark Rivera heard his name. Not the polite kind of quiet. The sharp kind. The kind that makes your skin tighten before you even know why. Dana Holloway, Regional Operations Manager and the woman who signed his last 3 performance reviews, didn't look up from the tablet in her hand when she spoke. Her voice stayed smooth. Professional. Careful. You can step outside for a moment, Mark. Every chair along the glass table shifted just slightly. Not loud. Just enough. Mark felt the heat climb up the back of his neck. He had been standing at the end of the table with a box of printed inventory sheets still tucked under his arm. The cheap paper edge pressed into his forearm hard enough to leave a line. For a second, he thought he had misheard, because this meeting was about the new loss prevention rollout. And loss prevention was his department. Mark blinked once. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "You want me to step out?" Dana finally looked up. Not angry, not even annoyed, just settled. "Yes, it'll just take a minute." Across the table, Kevin Mercer, assistant store director and the man who'd been circling Mark's position for the last 6 months, leaned back in his chair. Kevin didn't smile, but his fingers tapped once against his coffee lid. Mark noticed that. He noticed everything when the room turned on him. Something cold slid into his stomach. Still, he nodded. "Professional. Always professional. Sure, I'll be right outside." He set the inventory sheets down carefully on the table instead of dropping them. Small things mattered in rooms like this. Optics mattered. Body language mattered. He had learned that the hard way his first year in retail management. As he turned toward the door, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the glass wall. 34, tired eyes, tie slightly crooked, and for the first time in a long while, he looked unsure. The door clicked softly behind him. The hallway outside the conference room smelled faintly like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. Mark stood there for 3 full seconds. 4, 5. Then the voices inside the room dropped low. Too low to make out words, but not low enough to hide the tone. Discussion. Tension, something being decided. A tight pressure began building behind his ribs. This wasn't normal. Dana had never asked him to step out of a meeting about his own department. Not once. Mark pulled his phone from his pocket. No messages, no alerts, just a lock screen staring back at him. 6:43 a.m., too early for corporate to be involved. Too early for anything big, unless... The thought came fast and ugly. Shrink? Inventory loss? The word sat heavy in his chest. Mark swallowed. Over the last quarter, the numbers had been off. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger automatic audits, but enough to make someone upstairs start asking questions. He had flagged it, documented it, sent 2 separate reports. No response. Kevin, though. Kevin had suddenly started asking a lot more questions about the receipt audit system. About how far back transaction histories could be pulled. About who had override authority. At the time, Mark had told himself it was normal. Standard curiosity. Assistant directors always wanted to understand the controls. Now, standing alone in the hallway while his manager held a closed door meeting about loss prevention, that earlier conversation replayed in his head with a different weight. His jaw tightened. Inside the room, a chair scraped. Then the door opened. Donna stepped out. Kevin stayed seated inside. Interesting. Dana closed the door gently behind her and folded her arms. Mark noticed something immediately. She wasn't angry, but she also wasn't relaxed. There was a careful distance in her posture, the kind managers use when HR has already been looped in. Mark felt the cold in his stomach spread. Donna exhaled once. "Mark, I'm going to ask you something directly." His pulse ticked up. "Okay." Her eyes held his for a long second. have you accessed the manual receipt override system outside of scheduled audit windows? The question hit like a dropped weight. Mark blinked, once, twice. No, he said, simple, immediate, because it was the truth. Dana watched him carefully. You're sure about that? Something in her tone had shifted, not accusatory, worse, cautious, like she was already halfway convinced of something she didn't want to believe. Mark felt heat rise into his face. Yes, he said again, slower now, I'm sure. Behind the conference room door, Mark heard movement. Kevin again, probably listening. The realization made something ugly twist in Mark's chest. Dana nodded once, then she said the sentence that made the floor tilt slightly under his feet. Because we pulled the receipt history last night. Silence filled the hallway, and for the first time since this started, Mark felt something sharp and electric move through his veins. Not fear, not exactly, recognition. Because suddenly, pieces that had felt loose for weeks started sliding toward each other. Dana continued carefully. There are multiple after-hours access points under your credentials. Mark's heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That was the first moment something inside him went very still, because now he knew exactly what kind of morning this was going to be. He lifted his eyes to meet hers fully. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking, instead of stumbling over explanations, Mark asked one quiet question. What dates? Dana hesitated, just briefly. Then she answered. Last Thursday and the Monday before. Mark's fingers curled slowly at his sides, not defensive, not nervous, measured. Because last Thursday and the Monday before, Mark Rivera had not even been in the building. And suddenly, very quietly, the direction of the morning began to change. Via Tiep, Part 2. The silence between them stretched just a little too long. Dana noticed. Mark saw the flicker in her eyes when he did not rush to defend himself. Most people did. Most people filled silence with nervous words, excuses, rambling. Mark just stood there, still, thinking. Last Thursday, Monday before that, he replayed his own schedule with the kind of precision that came from years in loss prevention. Last Thursday, he had left early for the regional safety training across town. Badge logs would show it. Camera at the front exit would show it. The Monday before, he had worked the opening shift and left before 6 in the evening. Not even close to after hours. Something cold and sharp settled into place inside his chest. Mark lifted his eyes back to Dana. What time stamps are showing? He asked quietly. Dana's arms tightened slightly across her chest. Late access windows. Between 9:40 p.m. and 11:15 p.m., Mark let out a slow breath through his nose. Not dramatic, not defensive, just controlled. And inside his head, another memory surfaced. Kevin's voice from 2 weeks ago. Casual, too casual. How far back can the system pull receipt overrides if someone needed to review shrink patterns? At the time, Mark had answered automatically. 12 months stored locally. Longer if corporate pulls archive. He had not thought twice about it. Now the memory sat in his stomach like spoiled milk. Dana watched him carefully. You don't seem surprised. There it was, the shift. Mark felt it. This was the moment the room usually tilted against someone. The moment where panic or defensiveness sealed the narrative. He forced himself to stay calm, measured. Because panic makes people stop listening. I'm not surprised the system shows activity, Mark said slowly. Dana's eyes narrowed just slightly. But he let the word hang for half a second. I'm surprised you think it was me. That landed, not aggressive, not emotional, just steady. Dana's posture shifted almost invisibly, a small crack. Behind the conference room door there was movement again. Kevin was definitely listening now. Mark could feel it. The hallway air felt tighter. Dana exhaled slowly. Mark, your credentials were used. I understand that. His voice stayed level. "But you asked if I accessed it. That's a different question." Something flickered across her face. Uncertainty. Mark pressed forward carefully. "Did the system log the terminal location?" Dana hesitated. "Just long enough?" "Yes." "Where?" "Inside LP Office Workstation 2. Mark's jaw tightened. That was his station, officially, but not exclusively. Anyone with supervisor access could sit there. Anyone who knew the layout. Anyone who had watched him long enough. And suddenly another memory surfaced. Small. Annoying at the time, important now. 3 weeks ago. Kevin standing too casually in the LP doorway while Mark finished a late report. Kevin leaning against the frame. Watching. Asking light questions about the login timeout window. Mark felt something ugly crawl up his spine. Dana was still watching him. Reading him. Trying to decide something. Mark knew this dance. He had sat on the other side of it before. Loss prevention was not just about catching thieves. It was about reading people when the room got tight. Right now, Dana was not convinced. But she was not fully against him either. That narrow space in between. That was where this could still be turned. Mark spoke carefully. Did the pull include camera cross-check? Dana's brows pulled together slightly. "We have not finished full review yet." That was answer enough. They moved fast on the data, but not the footage. Too fast. Mark nodded slowly. Inside his chest, the earlier pressure had changed shape, still heavy, but sharper now, focused, because this no longer felt like random system noise. This felt like someone had moved pieces deliberately. Dana shifted her weight. "Mark, I need you to understand how this looks." There it was. Not an accusation, but the beginning of one. Mark felt something hot flash through him. Not anger yet, but close. He thought about the last 6 months, the extra hours, the weekend audits, the nights he stayed late cleaning up inventory reports no one else wanted to touch. He thought about Kevin's polite smiles, the way Kevin had started inserting himself into loss meetings he had never cared about before. For the first time, something rough edged into Mark's voice. "I do understand." Dana held his gaze. Then she said quietly, "Kevin flagged the discrepancy last night." The hallway seemed to tilt half an inch. There it was. Clean. Simple. "Kevin." Mark felt his pulse thump once behind his ribs. Hard, but his face stayed neutral. Careful. Professional. "Of course he did," Mark said softly. Inside the conference room, a chair shifted again. Kevin was definitely right on the other side of that door, listening to every word. Mark straightened slightly, not defensive, grounded. Then he asked the question that made Dana's expression change for the first time since this started. "Can we pull the full receipt history together?" Dana blinked. Why? Mark's eyes did not move. "Because if someone wanted you to see my credentials..." He let the sentence settle in the air. "They probably didn't want you to see the pattern." And for the first time that morning, real doubt moved across Dana Holloway's face. Dana did not answer right away. That alone told Mark more than words would have. Because Dana Holloway was not a woman who hesitated when she felt confident. She was sharp, efficient, known across the district for moving fast once she believed the numbers. Right now, she was thinking. Good. Mark kept his breathing slow and even. Inside, though, something tighter had started to coil. Not panic, focus. He had seen this kind of setup before, not often, but enough. People who manipulated its systems rarely did it clean. They counted on surface checks, quick assumptions. Managers who were too busy to dig past the first red flag. Kevin was ambitious, everyone knew that. But ambition alone did not mean anything. Still, Mark replayed the last few weeks in his head with brutal honesty. Kevin lingering near the LP office, Kevin asking casual questions about login timeout, Kevin suddenly taking interest in shrink reports he had ignored for months. At the time, it had just felt annoying. Now, it felt pointed. Donna finally spoke. "What pattern are you expecting to see?" Careful words. Not defensive, but not fully trusting him either. Mark respected that. If their positions were reversed, he would not trust easily either. He answered slowly. "If I was running unauthorized overrides," he let the sentence breathe, "you would see irregular transaction targets." Dana's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." Mark shifted his weight but kept his posture open. Not confrontational, not closed off. People committing internal fraud usually chase something specific. Refund loops, gift card drains, high-value item adjustments. There's always a behavioral footprint. Dana's attention sharpened. Mark could see the exact second her professional instincts kicked in. "Good." He continued, voice calm but precise. "But if someone just needed my credentials to look dirty—" He paused. Let the implication land, the activity would look scattered. Small, random. Just enough to trigger concern. Dana's arms slowly uncrossed. That was new. Mark noticed everything. Behind the conference room door there was movement again. Kevin shifting. Listening harder now. Mark felt something dark flicker low in his chest. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Just awareness. Dana studied him for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "Why would someone do that?" There it was, the first real opening. Mark did not rush. Rushing makes you look eager. Eagerness looks defensive. Instead, he gave the most honest answer he could without overplaying his hand. "I don't know yet." He held her gaze. "But I would like to find out." The hallway went very still. Donna exhaled slowly through her nose. Mark could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes now. Procedure versus instinct, data versus history, because Mark Rivera was not new. He had been in that building almost 6 years. Clean audits, solid reviews, quiet, reliable, not flashy, and definitely not sloppy. Finally, Dana nodded once, short, decisive, "Come back in." The conference room door opened. Kevin Mercer straightened immediately in his chair when they walked in. Too fast. Too alert. Mark clocked it without moving his face. The other department leads around the table looked up with that same uncomfortable curiosity people get when they smell internal trouble but don't want to be involved. Dana moved to the head of the table. Kevin leaned forward slightly. Professional concern written all over his face. Mark almost would have admired the performance if his stomach wasn't still tight. Dana set her tablet down. "We are going to review the full receipt pattern before making any decisions." Kevin's fingers stilled on his coffee cup. Just for a fraction of a second. But Mark saw it. Kevin recovered quickly. "Of course," Kevin said smoothly. "Just trying to stay ahead of shrink risk." His tone was perfect, helpful, reasonable. Mark lowered himself slowly into his usual chair. The vinyl seat felt colder than usual. Dana tapped the screen and rotated the tablet so the table could see. Rows of transactions filled the display. Timestamps, terminal numbers, override flags. At first glance, it did not look dramatic, which was exactly the problem. Mark leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning. Pattern recognition was muscle memory for him now. The first 2 minutes, he said nothing. The room waited. Kevin shifted once, then again, subtle, but restless. Mark's chest tightened just a little. There. Something small clicked into place. Not proof, not yet, but enough to make the back of his neck prickle. He pointed calmly at the screen. "Can you sort by item category?" Dana did it without comment. The list reorganized. Mark's pulse slowed further, because now the shape of it was clearer, too clean, too evenly distributed, no clustering, no product focus. It looked manufactured. Kevin spoke lightly. "Looks pretty straightforward to me." Mark finally lifted his eyes, not at Donna, at Kevin. And for the first time that morning, something sharp moved behind Mark Rivera's calm expression. "Maybe," he said quietly. Or maybe someone wanted it to look that way. The room went still, and Kevin's polite smile tightened just a fraction too late. The air in the conference room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but everyone at the table felt it. Kevin's smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes hardened. Mark saw it. Just a flicker. Most people in the room missed it. Loss prevention trained you to notice the things people failed to hide. Dana leaned slightly forward. "What exactly are you seeing, Mark?" Her voice was calm again. Professional. But now there was something else under it. Attention. Real attention. Mark kept his tone even. If someone was running real unauthorized overrides, you would expect repetition. He tapped lightly on the table near the screen. Same item groups, same price ranges, usually tied to something that can be resold fast. Electronics, gift cards, high-margin small items. Dana nodded slowly. She knew this. Kevin stayed quiet. Too quiet. Mark continued, "But this." He gestured toward the spread of transactions. "This is evenly distributed across low-risk categories. Cleaning supplies, seasonal clearance, random grocery adjustments." His eyes moved back to Dana. "It is noise." The word landed softly, but it landed. One of the department leads shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Kevin leaned back, folding his arms now. A defensive posture dressed up to look relaxed. "Or it is someone being sloppy," Kevin said. Light tone, too light. Mark finally let a hint of steel enter his voice. "Maybe." He held Kevin's gaze for half a second longer than necessary, but sloppy behavior usually escalates. This is not. Dana's fingers tapped once on the tablet, thinking. Kevin's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Mark felt the pressure in his chest ease just slightly. Not victory, not even close, but the narrative was no longer clean, and that mattered. Dana spoke again. We still have your credentials on the access logs." Mark nodded. "I know." His honesty made two people at the table glance up. Mark leaned forward slightly. "Which is why I would like to see the workstation camera for LP Office 2. There it was. The room went very still. Kevin moved. Just a small shift in his chair, but Mark saw that too. Dana's eyes sharpened. "You think someone else used your login?" Mark chose his words carefully. "I think we should verify before we assume." Professional, neutral, but firm. Dana held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "It should have the footage archived." Kevin spoke quickly. "Before we escalate this too far," the interruption was smooth, polished, but just a little too fast. Mark did not look at him yet. Kevin continued. "We are talking about after-hours access, limited staff in the building." The implication hung there. Heavy, unspoken. Mark finally turned his head, met Kevin's eyes fully. "Yes." His voice stayed calm. "We are." Kevin's fingers tapped once against his forearm. Dana stood. Decision made. "I am calling IT." The meeting was effectively over, but the tension stayed in the room like static. As Dana stepped into the hallway with her phone, the remaining department leads began their careful routine of looking busy while absolutely listening. Kevin leaned slightly toward Mark. Lower voice. Measured. "You know this is not a great look." There it was. The first direct pressure. Mark felt something hot and ugly flash in his chest. For a brief second, the part of him that was tired of always being the quiet, reliable one wanted to snap, to say what had been sitting in the back of his throat for months. But he forced it down, because emotional reactions were expensive. And Mark Rivera had learned to be patient. He turned slowly toward Kevin, his expression calm, almost neutral. Then he said quietly, "Neither is jumping to conclusions." Kevin's smile returned, but thinner now. The two men held eye contact for just a beat too long. Then Dana re-entered the room. "It is pulling the footage now." Her tone was clipped, efficient. But Mark caught the small shift. She was no longer fully on one side. Good. The waiting began. 5 minutes, 10. No one in the room pretended to work anymore. Even the air conditioning hum seemed louder. Mark sat back in his chair, hands loosely folded. But inside, something restless had started to build. Because he knew something no one else in the room knew yet. Last Thursday night, LP Office 2 had a blind spot, a small one, but enough. It had been on the maintenance request list for 3 weeks, still not fixed. At the time, it had just been another annoying facilities delay. Now, as the minutes ticked by and Dana's phone sat face down on the table, Mark felt a slow, cold realization creep up his spine. If someone had planned this carefully, the footage they were waiting for might not clear him, and for the first time that morning, the situation became dangerous in a whole new way. The waiting was the worst part. Not the silence, not the tension, the waiting. Because once you worked in loss prevention long enough, you learned something most people never did. Evidence did not always tell the truth. Sometimes it only told the version someone wanted you to see. Mark sat very still in his chair, but inside his thoughts were moving fast now. LP Office 2, workstation camera, blind spot. 3 weeks ago, he had filed the maintenance ticket himself after noticing the camera angle drift slightly off-center. Facilities had marked it low priority. Typical. Nothing ever moved fast unless money was already missing. Now, that small oversight sat in the middle of his chest like a stone. Across the table, Kevin looked relaxed again. Too relaxed. One ankle resting over the opposite knee. Coffee cup empty, watching the room like a man who believed the ending was already written. Mark forced himself to breathe slow. Do not assume. Do not react early. Because if Kevin was involved, he would be watching Mark just as closely. Dana's phone finally buzzed against the table. Every head in the room lifted at the same time. Dana picked it up, listened. Her expression did not give anything away at first. Mark watched carefully. The smallest signals mattered now, a slight tightening near her eyes. A pause that lasted just a fraction longer than normal. Then she said quietly into the phone, "Send the clip." The room held its breath. Dana's tablet chimed seconds later. She opened the file, turned the screen so the table could see. Mark leaned forward slowly and felt a cold drop into his stomach. The footage was grainy but clear enough. LP Office 2, timestamp, 9:52 p.m., last Thursday. The chair at Mark's workstation moved. A figure stepped into frame, broad shoulders, dark jacket. Back turned to the camera. The person sat down, reached forward, typed. Mark's jaw tightened. From this angle, the face was completely hidden. Kevin leaned forward slightly, voice soft but carrying. "That looks like your station, Mark." Not an accusation, not directly, but it landed in the room exactly the way it was meant to. Mark did not answer. He was still watching the screen, because something about the movement was bothering him. Not the body shape, not the clothes, the hands. The person at the keyboard paused, adjusted the mouse, then reached into their pocket, pulled something out, set it on the desk. Mark leaned closer. The grainy image sharpened just enough, a ring of keys, with a bright orange tag. Something clicked hard inside Mark's head. His pulse spiked, because LP did not use orange tags. Maintenance did. Kevin shifted beside him. Subtle, but Mark caught it. Dana frowned slightly at the screen. "Can we zoom the desk area?" The video enlarged, pixelated, but clearer. The orange tag was unmistakable now. One of the department leads spoke quietly. "That looks like a maintenance key set." The room changed. Not fully, not yet. But the clean narrative had just cracked open. Kevin's voice came quickly. Maintenance staff do not have LP credentials. Too quick, too smooth. Mark finally spoke. Calm, controlled, not looking at Kevin. No, they do not. He lifted his eyes slowly to Dana. But supervisors do. Silence dropped heavy across the table. Dana's gaze sharpened. Explain. Mark kept his tone steady. Supervisor credentials allow temporary workstation access if someone logs in and fails to sign out. He let that sit for a second. Standard security overlap. Kevin's fingers stilled completely now. The relaxed posture was gone. Mark could feel the shift beside him without even looking. Dana's voice lowered slightly. Are you saying someone used an open session? Mark nodded once. It is possible. He did not overstate it, did not push, just laid the door open. Dana looked back at the screen. The figure stood up in the footage. Still no face, still turned away. But as the person exited frame, the camera caught one small detail. The edge of a name badge swinging from the jacket pocket, blurry, but visible. The room leaned in collectively. Dana froze the frame, zoomed. The pixels struggled to resolve. Letters began to form. Not fully clear, but enough to make the air in the room change completely. Because the first name on the badge was not Mark, and for the first time that morning, Kevin Mercer stopped looking comfortable. The room went very quiet. Not the earlier kind of quiet filled with assumption. This one was heavier, more careful. Donna leaned closer to the tablet, fingers steady but slower now. Zoom in more. IT enhanced the frame remotely. The image sharpened just enough to be dangerous. The badge was still slightly blurred, but the first 4 letters were now readable. KEVI. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the low hum of the air vent seemed to fade. Mark did not turn his head. He did not need to. He could feel the temperature beside him change. Kevin's breathing had shifted. Just slightly. Too shallow. Dana straightened slowly. Kevin. Her voice was calm, but the edge was there now. Kevin reacted fast. Too fast. That's not clear enough to draw conclusions. Professional tone, controlled. But there was a tightness under it that had not been there earlier. Mark kept his face neutral. Inside, though, his pulse was pounding hard enough to make his fingertips buzz. Dana did not look away from the screen. Aye. Can you pull the entry badge logs for after hours last Thursday? Kevin's chair moved. A small scrape against the floor. Mark finally turned his head. Kevin's jaw was tight now. The smooth confidence from earlier had thinned. Not gone, but strained. Kevin forced a small breath through his nose. There were multiple supervisors in the building that night. Reasonable. Logical. But defensive. Dana nodded once. We will verify. The waiting started again. This time, the energy in the room was completely different. People were no longer watching Mark. They were watching Kevin. He felt it too. His shoulders had gone subtly rigid. Mark sat back slowly, hands still folded loosely. But something deep in his chest had shifted. For the first time that morning, he was no longer bracing for impact. Now he was watching the pieces move. Dana's phone buzzed again, faster this time. She read the screen. Her eyes flicked up. Directly to Kevin. Entry logs show only one supervisor badge in the building during that window. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Kevin did not speak immediately. Dana continued. Kevin Mercer. There it was. Clean, undeniable. Across the table, one of the department leads leaned back slowly like the air had just been knocked out of him. Kevin finally spoke. Voice tighter now. I was in the building, yes, but that does not mean... Mark's voice entered quietly. Still calm. Still measured. Did you use LP Workstation 2 last Thursday night? Not aggressive, not loud, but it landed harder than anything else that morning. Kevin's eyes snapped to him. For the first time since this began, there was real heat there. Careful what you are implying. Mark held his gaze evenly. I am asking a direct question. Dana's posture had fully shifted now. No longer cautious distance, now she was locked in. Kevin, answer the question. Kevin exhaled slowly. Too slowly. I stopped by LP to check the weekly shrink summary. Mark's stomach dropped half an inch. Because that answer was clever. Carefully worded, but incomplete. Dana caught it too. Did you access the override system? A beat. Too long. Kevin's fingers flexed once against the table. I do not recall. That was the moment the room turned. Not fully, but enough. Because in loss prevention, there was one answer that always raised alarms. I do not recall. Mark felt something cold and steady settle into place. Not victory, not yet, but the narrative had cracked open. Dana's voice went very quiet. I'd pull full workstation activity under Kevin's badge from last Thursday. Kevin leaned back slowly, but the relaxed posture from earlier was gone for good now. Mark watched him carefully because right there, in the tight set of Kevin's jaw, in the shallow rhythm of his breathing, in the way his fingers had stopped moving completely, Mark Rivera saw something he had been trained to recognize years ago. Not uncertainty, not confusion, containment. Someone trying very hard not to lose control. And for the first time that morning, Kevin Mercer looked like a man who had just realized the receipt history was only the beginning. No one in the room pretended to work anymore. Even the department leads who normally avoided internal conflict were now fully alert, eyes moving between Dana's tablet and Kevin's face. Kevin kept his posture upright, controlled, but the polish was cracking in small places. Mark saw it in the tightness at the corners of Kevin's mouth, in the way his foot had started tapping once under the table, then stopped when he realized it. Dana did not rush. That was what made her effective. She waited. Let silence do the work. 88 responded faster this time. Her tablet chimed. She opened the file. Her eyes moved left to right. Once. Twice. Then her jaw set. Mark felt the shift before she even spoke. Kevin. Her voice was quieter now, but much heavier. System logs show your badge opened LP Office 2 at 9:48 p.m. Kevin's lips pressed together. Dana continued. Override screen accessed at 9:51 p.m. Another pause. Dana's eyes lifted slowly. Override executed at 9:52 p.m. The same timestamp they had all just watched. Kevin finally moved. Not dramatically, just a slow exhale through his nose. Like a man buying time. Mark felt something twist in his chest, not satisfaction, something more complicated. Because he knew this moment. He had watched other people sit in that exact chair when the room started closing in. Dana spoke again. Flat. Direct. Do you want to explain why your badge and his credentials were both active on the same workstation? The question landed hard. Kevin's gaze flicked once toward Mark. Quick, sharp, then back to Dana. I already told you I was reviewing shrink. Mark did not move, but his voice came quietly into the space. After hours, Kevin's head turned towards him slowly. Yes, the word came out tighter than before. Mark tilted his head just slightly, measured, curious, almost gentle. Why not during business hours? There it was, the pressure point. Kevin's fingers curled once against the edge of the table. Donna was watching very closely now. Kevin forced a breath. Because I did not want to interrupt floor operations. Smooth answer. Reasonable on the surface. But something in the room did not fully buy it anymore. Mark leaned back slightly in his chair, still calm, still controlled. Then he asked the question that shifted everything again. Did you notify loss prevention before accessing their workstation? Kevin did not answer immediately. Another small crack. Dana's eyes narrowed. Kevin. His jaw flexed. No. The word came out flat. Mark nodded once, like he had expected that. Inside, though, his pulse had started climbing again, because the path forward was opening now, but it was also getting more dangerous. Dana folded her arms slowly. "You know the protocol." Kevin's voice sharpened just slightly. "I was acting in the store's interest." Mark felt heat flicker low in his chest. There it was, the first hint of defensiveness. Small, but real. Dana did not react emotionally. She never did. Protocol exists for a reason. Kevin leaned forward now. Posture no longer relaxed. I found suspicious activity under his credentials. His head tilted toward Mark. So yes. I moved quickly. The room shifted again, not fully back, but enough to muddy the water. Mark felt it. Kevin was not done. Kevin continued, voice controlled but firmer now. "If I had waited, we could have lost more." Dana's gaze moved slowly between the two men. "We are not done reviewing," Mark spoke quietly. "Then let's review everything." Dana looked at him. Mark held steady. Full receipt history, full workstation logs, full camera sweep, every word. Calm, precise, professional. But the message underneath was clear. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Kevin's jaw tightened again. For the first time that morning, a faint sheen of tension showed at his temple. Dana nodded slowly. Agreed. She tapped her tablet again. IT pull full transaction pattern for the last 60 days tied to these overrides. The waiting returned. But this time, it felt different. Heavier, like the room itself understood something bigger was starting to surface. Mark sat very still. But inside, his thoughts were racing now, because Kevin had made one mistake. A small one. But Mark had caught it. Kevin had said he found suspicious activity. Past tense. Before the investigation had even fully started. And in loss prevention, there was one thing more dangerous than bad data. It was someone who sounded a little too prepared. Mark's eyes lifted slowly toward the tablet as new rows of receipt history began loading onto the screen. Because something in his gut told him. They were about to find a pattern Kevin had not planned for. The new data took longer to load. Too many transactions. Too many days. Too much noise for anyone in the room except Mark to feel comfortable yet. Dana turned the tablet so everyone could see. Rows and rows of receipt activity filled the screen. Date, time, terminal, override flag. Kevin leaned forward again, trying to look engaged, but the earlier confidence had not returned. Mark noticed his right hand resting flat on the table now. Not tapping, not moving, holding still. People only do that when they are trying very hard not to show nerves. Dana spoke quietly. "Walk us through what you are looking for, Mark." The tone had changed again. Still neutral. But now there was weight behind it. She was listening, really listening. Mark leaned forward slowly, eyes scanning the data. His voice stayed calm. If the overrides were legitimate reviews, they should follow store traffic patterns. He scrolled carefully. Peak hours, high-volume windows, operational logic. Dana nodded once. That made sense. Mark continued. If they were fraud attempts for profit. He paused briefly. You would see concentration around high-value items. Kevin shifted. Just slightly. Mark did not look at him. He kept his focus on the screen. But if they were planted, activity meant to trigger concern. He let the sentence breathe. The room leaned in. You would expect something else. Dana's voice was low. What? Mark stopped scrolling. His finger hovered over the screen. Then he rotated the tablet slightly so Dana could see more clearly. Timing gaps. The words landed softly, but heavily. Dana leaned closer. Her eyes moved line by line. Mark spoke again. Whoever did this was careful. Overrides are spaced just far enough apart to avoid system alerts. Kevin's jaw tightened. Mark continued calmly. But they are too evenly spaced, too controlled, too clean. Dana's posture shifted forward, now fully engaged. Mark tapped 3 separate timestamps. See this, and this, and this. The room leaned in further. Each override sat almost exactly the same number of minutes apart. Not random, not organic, mechanical. Kevin spoke quickly. Coincidences happen too quickly. Mark finally turned his head, met Kevin's eyes fully. Yes. His voice stayed level. They do. Then he turned back to Dana. But patterns do not lie. Dana's finger moved slowly across the screen, following the intervals. Her expression hardened by degrees. Kevin leaned back now, but the controlled calm from earlier was gone. His shoulders were tighter, his breathing shallower. Donna spoke quietly. IT, cross-reference building access logs for these timestamps. Kevin's head turned sharply. That is unnecessary. The push came too fast, too sharp. The room felt it immediately. Dana did not even look up. Run it. The order was flat. Final. Silence fell again, but this time it pressed down heavier than before. Mark sat back slowly. His pulse was steady now, cold, focused, because the pieces were starting to align in a way he had hoped for but had not fully trusted yet. Kevin had been careful. Very careful. But careful people sometimes overcorrect, and overcorrection leaves fingerprints. Dana's tablet chimed again. She opened the new file. Her eyes moved quickly now, faster than before, then slower, then very still. Kevin stopped breathing. Mark could feel it without looking. Dana lifted her head. Kevin. Her voice had lost all softness now. Building access shows your badge entering LP corridor within 3 minutes of every override. The room froze. Kevin's face went tight. That proves nothing. But the confidence was gone now. Dana's eyes did not leave his. It proves proximity. Kevin's fingers curled against the table edge. Mark stayed silent. Let the pressure build. Dana leaned back slowly. And for the first time that morning, the balance of the room had fully shifted. Because now, the receipt history was no longer pointing at Mark. It was circling Kevin Mercer. No one spoke for several long seconds, the kind of silence that makes every small movement sound louder than it should. Kevin's chair creaked when he shifted, too sharp in the quiet room. Dana did not look away from him. Her voice came out calm, but there was steel under it now. Walk me through exactly what you were doing in the LP corridor that night. Kevin exhaled slowly, buying time, reviewing shrink reports. Same answer, same careful tone. But something had changed. Earlier it sounded confident. Now it sounded rehearsed. Mark kept his face neutral, but inside his chest, something cold settled deeper into place. Because Kevin was not adjusting his story, and that was a mistake. Dana tapped the tablet once. Your badge hits are within 3 minutes of every override. Kevin's jaw flexed. Correlation is not proof. His voice was sharper now, not aggressive, but strained. Dana nodded slightly. You are correct. A small pause. Then she leaned forward. Which is why I'm asking you directly. The room leaned with her. Did you access the override system using Mark's open session? Kevin's eyes flicked toward Mark. Quick, hard. Then back to Dana. No. The word came out fast, too fast. Mark finally moved, just slightly in his chair. His voice entered quietly. Dana. She turned toward him. Mark kept his tone careful. Can we check one more thing? Kevin's head turned sharply. Dana studied Mark for half a second. What? Mark's eyes moved back to the tablet. Scroll to the item-level detail on those overrides. Dana did it. The screen shifted. More data appeared. SKU numbers, price adjustments, department codes. Mark leaned forward slowly. His pulse was steady now, because this was the part he had been waiting for. He spoke calmly. Earlier, Kevin mentioned he flagged a suspicious activity. Kevin's shoulders tightened. Dana's eyes flicked between them. Mark continued. If that is true, he tapped lightly on the screen. We should see a risk pattern. Dana's brow furrowed slightly. Explain. Mark's voice stayed even. When someone reviews for shrink, they focus on high-risk categories first. Electronics, gift cards, high-margin items. He looked up at Kevin briefly, then back to the data. But these overrides... He scrolled slowly. Cleaning products, seasonal markdowns, low-value grocery. The room grew quieter. Mark let the silence stretch just long enough. Then he delivered the line that shifted everything again. This is not where you start if you are chasing real loss. Dana's eyes sharpened. Kevin leaned forward quickly. I was reviewing broadly. Too quick, too defensive. Mark did not react emotionally. He just asked one quiet question. Then why did the override stop the moment my credentials were flagged? The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kevin froze, just for a fraction too long. Dana's head turned slowly toward him. Kevin's voice came out tighter now. I do not control when system reviews happen. Mark held steady. No one said you did. Silence slammed down across the table. Because now the room was no longer looking at data. They were watching behavior. And Kevin Mercer was starting to look like a man losing control of the narrative. Dana's fingers tapped slowly against the tablet. Kevin, her voice was very calm, but the decision was already forming behind her eyes. Until we complete full review, your system access is suspended. The words landed clean. Final. Kevin stared at her, disbelief flickering through the tight control on his face. You are suspending me. Dana did not blink. Temporary, standard procedure. Mark sat very still, but inside, something complicated moved through his chest. Not victory, not relief. Because this was not over. Not even close. Kevin leaned back slowly, but the calm mask had cracked now. Fine. The word came out flat, but his eyes slid once toward Mark, sharp, cold, and for the first time that morning, Mark Rivera felt a quiet warning move through his gut. Because men like Kevin did not unravel quietly. And something told Mark this was about to get messier. The meeting ended without anyone officially calling it over. People just stopped talking. Chairs shifted, papers gathered. Eyes carefully avoided direct contact. The kind of quiet corporate exit everyone learned when something uncomfortable had just happened. Mark stayed seated. Not rushing, not celebrating. Because the pressure in his chest had not gone away. If anything, it had sharpened. Across the table, Kevin stood slowly, controlled, deliberate, but the smooth confidence from earlier that morning was gone for good now. Donna spoke first. Kevin, HR will follow up before end of day, professional tone, no emotion. Kevin gave one tight nod. Understood. His eyes moved once more toward Mark. Brief, cold, then he walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Only then did the tension shift. One of the department leads let out a breath he had clearly been holding. Dana remained standing at the head of the table. Her attention returned to Mark. Her voice was quieter now. Measured. You handled that carefully. Not praise, not quite, but close enough to notice. Mark leaned back slowly, still trying to keep his own emotions in check. I did not want assumptions to move faster than the data. Dana studied him for a long moment. There was something different in her expression now. Less distance, more evaluation. She nodded once. Good instinct. The room began to empty. Within a minute, it was just the two of them. Dana lowered herself into one of the chairs across from him. Mark. His name came softer this time. I need you to be straight with me. Mark held her gaze. Always. A small pause. Then she asked the question that had been sitting between them since the hallway. Have you noticed anything unusual with Kevin recently? Mark did not answer immediately, because honesty mattered here. But so did precision. Yes, Dana's eyes sharpened. "Tell me." Mark folded his hands loosely. Last month, he started asking detailed questions about LP access windows, override retention, session timeouts. Dana's brow tightened slightly. "Why did you not flag it?" Mark answered honestly. Because on the surface, it was within his role to understand the systems. He held her gaze. Nothing he asked crossed policy. Dana leaned back slowly, thinking. Mark continued carefully, but the timing changed. Dana's eyes flicked back to him. "How?" Mark's voice stayed calm. The questions increased right before the first irregular receipt activity appeared. Silence settled between them again. He let that sit. Did not push. Dana exhaled slowly. "That is concerning." Mark nodded once. "Yes." Another pause. Then Dana said something that made the weight in Mark's chest shift again. "HR will likely open a formal review." Mark felt his stomach tighten slightly. Formal reviews were never simple. "Never quick," Dana continued. "Until then, I want you documenting everything." Mark straightened slightly, understood. She held his gaze one more second. And Mark, his attention sharpened. "Yes." Dana's voice lowered just a fraction. "Be careful." The words were quiet. But they carried weight. Mark felt a slow chill move up his spine. Because that was not standard corporate language. That was instinct talking. He gave one slow nod. "I will." Dana stood, gathered her tablet, and just before she left the room, she paused. "One last thing." Mark looked up. Kevin is not known for sloppy mistakes. The door opened, then closed behind her. Mark sat alone in the quiet conference room, hands still, mind moving fast. Because Dana was right about one thing. Kevin Mercer was not sloppy, which meant one of two things was true. Either Kevin had made a rare careless move, or... Mark leaned back slowly in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. The situation was not finished unfolding yet, and deep in his gut, Mark Rivera was starting to suspect the real play had not even surfaced. Not yet. Mark did not go back to his office right away. Instead, he stood alone in the empty conference room for nearly a full minute after Dana left. Breathing slow, thinking slower, because something about the timeline still felt off. Kevin was ambitious, careful, methodical. Men like that did not risk their careers on sloppy after-hours moves unless there was something bigger underneath. Mark gathered his inventory sheets from the table. The paper edges were slightly bent now from where he had been gripping them earlier. A small detail, but it grounded him. He stepped into the hallway. The store was fully open now. Morning traffic had picked up, shopping carts rolling, register scanners beeping in steady rhythm. Normal life continuing like nothing had just shifted upstairs. Mark started toward the LP office. Halfway down the corridor, he slowed. Something caught his eye. Facilities board, mounted near the service hallway, maintenance requests. Most people walked past it every day without looking. Mark never did. Loss prevention trained you to notice background details. He stepped closer, scanned the list, lighting repair, freezer calibration, camera realignment. His pulse ticked once. There it was. LP Office 2-camera adjustment. Status completed. Mark frowned slightly. Completed. That was wrong. Because 3 days ago when he checked the blind spot again, the angle had still been off. He knew because it had bothered him enough to make a note. Something cold moved through his chest. Mark pulled his phone from his pocket, opened his notes, scrolled. There. Time stamped from earlier in the week. Camera still misaligned. Follow-up needed. His jaw tightened slowly. Either facilities had fixed it in the last 72 hours, or someone had updated the status without touching the camera. Neither option felt comfortable. Mark turned slowly and headed toward LP Office 2. The corridor felt quieter than usual. The door to the LP room stood half closed. He pushed it open gently. The familiar hum of equipment greeted him. Monitors, terminal, camera feeds flickering across the wall. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Mark stepped inside and walked directly to workstation 2. He crouched slightly, looked up toward the ceiling camera. His stomach dropped. The angle had changed, not by much, but enough to close the blind spot, enough to give a clearer view of the workstation area, enough to make last Thursday's footage suddenly make more sense. Mark stood very still, because now a different possibility was forming. If the camera angle had been corrected recently, then the footage they reviewed earlier should have shown a clearer face unless the footage they were given was pulled before the adjustment. Or Mark's pulse kicked harder, unless someone had known exactly what window of footage would be reviewed. He moved slowly to the terminal, logged in, pulled the internal maintenance log, scrolled. There. Camera adjustment timestamp. Yesterday afternoon. Mark stared at the screen. Long. Still. Because the implications were not small. If the camera had only been properly aligned yesterday, then last Thursday's footage should have been worse, more obstructed, not cleaner. Something did not line up, not clean, not logical. Mark leaned back slowly in the chair, heart now beating harder, because the picture forming in his head was getting uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Footsteps approached in the hallway. Mark looked up. Donna stood in the doorway. Her eyes moved from him to the camera, then back to the terminal screen. Her voice came quiet. "You saw it too." Mark nodded slowly. Yes. Dana stepped fully into the room, closed the door behind her. Her expression was no longer cautious. It was sharp, focused. Kevin filed the camera adjustment request himself. The words landed heavy in the small office. Mark felt the chill spread fully through his chest now, because the pieces were no longer just suspicious. They were starting to connect. Donna folded her arms slowly. "And Mark." Her voice dropped slightly. "That request came in the morning after he flagged your credentials." Silence filled the LP office, thick, pressurized. Mark's jaw tightened, because now the question was no longer whether Kevin had touched the system. Now the question was much more dangerous. How far ahead had Kevin Mercer been planning this? And more importantly, what had he expected no one to notice? The room felt smaller, not physically, but the kind of tight that comes when the truth starts closing in. Mark stood beside the workstation, eyes still on the maintenance log. Dana remained near the door, arms folded, thinking 3 steps ahead the way good operators did. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Mark said quietly, "If he filed the adjustment after flagging my credentials..." Dana finished the thought. "He expected us to rely on the earlier footage." Mark nodded once. Yes. Her jaw tightened, because that meant intent. Not curiosity, not routine review, planning. Dana moved closer to the terminal. "Show me the full ticket history." Mark pulled it up. The maintenance request opened. Original submission. Priority marked routine. Filed under Kevin Mercer. Dana leaned in. Scroll, Mark did. A second entry appeared lower in the log. Update added. Dana's eyes narrowed, read it. Mark's voice stayed steady. Camera angle appears partially obstructed. Recommend adjustment for clearer workstation view. Silence fell again. Dana exhaled slowly through her nose. He was shaping the narrative. Mark did not answer. He did not need to. The evidence was starting to speak for itself. Dana straightened. Her voice was calm again. But now it carried decision. HR needs to see this immediately. Mark nodded. "I will compile the packet." Dana studied him for a moment. Then something in her expression softened just slightly. You handled today better than most would have." Mark gave a small breath. Honest, I was not sure it would hold. Dana's mouth pressed into a thin line. It almost did not. The truth in that sat heavy between them, because it had been close, too close. Dana turned toward the door. Before she opened it, she paused Mark. He looked up. Her voice dropped just a fraction. "Stay sharp." Then she was gone. The LP office fell quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Cleaner. Mark sank slowly into the chair at workstation 2, his hands finally unclenched. The adrenaline from the morning was starting to drain out of his system, leaving behind that strange hollow fatigue that always followed high-tension moments. He leaned forward, pulled the full receipt history, started documenting timestamps, badge logs, camera adjustments, everything. Because this part mattered just as much as the confrontation. Facts had to be clean, unemotional, unshakable. It took nearly 2 hours. By the time he finished, the store was deep into the late morning rush. Dana returned just after 11. "HR is opening formal review." Mark nodded once, expected. Donna set her tablet down on the desk. "Kevin has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." The words landed quietly, but heavily. Mark sat back slowly. Not relief, not satisfaction, just stillness. Because he knew how these things went. Nothing was final yet. Dana seemed to read the thought. This will take time. Mark gave a small nod, understood. She picked up the evidence packet he had assembled, flipped through the first few pages, then closed it with a soft tap. Clean work. Mark allowed himself the smallest exhale. Dana moved toward the door, then paused. One last look back. "You protected your position today." Mark met her eyes. Calm, measured. "I protected the facts." Donna held his gaze for a second longer, then gave one small nod and left. The door clicked shut. Mark sat alone once more, but the weight in his chest had finally eased. Not completely, but enough. Because the truth had surfaced the way it usually did, quietly, patiently, without drama. He looked up at the ceiling camera one more time, now perfectly aligned, watching everything. For the first time all morning, Mark allowed himself a slow breath. In retail, people rarely got dramatic justice. No applause, no public moment, just documentation, process, and consequences that unfolded slowly behind closed doors. But sometimes that was enough. Mark turned back to his terminal and resumed work, because the store was still running. Customers were still walking through the doors. And loss prevention never really stopped. Not even after the receipt history told the real story. If this story pulled you in, you are exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe to FinalText for more real-world stories where the quiet details matter most. And tell me in the comments at what moment did you realize something was wrong with Kevin